Freedom is slavery. War is peace. Ignorance is strength. At first glance, these words sound absurd. They contradict everything we believe to be rational and true. How can slavery possibly mean freedom? How can war bring peace? And how can ignorance, the absence of knowledge, ever become a form of power? Yet in George Orwell's 1984, these phrases are not meant to be laughed at. They are deadly serious. They are painted on massive posters, broadcast through telescreens, and whispered into the minds of millions. For the people living in this dystopia, they are not contradictions at all. They are reality. And this forces us to ask a deeper question. How do human beings come to accept such contradictions as truth? Imagine walking through the streets of a city where every wall carries these slogans. Imagine growing up in a world where every radio, every classroom, every book repeats them until your mind stops questioning. You might laugh the first time you hear them, but eventually, after years of repetition, the laughter dies. What once sounded insane slowly becomes familiar, and what is familiar, with time, begins to feel true. This is the terrifying brilliance of Orwell's vision. 1984 is not just about politics or power. It is about the fragility of truth itself. It is about how language, repetition, and fear can reshape reality. But here's the unsettling part. 1984 is not only a story about the future, it is also a reflection of the past and a warning about the present. Orwell wrote these words after watching the rise of fascism, communism, and authoritarian regimes. He saw how entire populations could be persuaded to believe the unbelievable, to cheer for their own oppression, and even to denounce their own friends and families. The slogans of 1984 are not random inventions. They are echoes of real history. When Orwell writes freedom is slavery, he is reminding us that many dictatorships present obedience as liberation. To obey is to be free from choice, free from responsibility, free from doubt. War is peace reflects how leaders often justify endless conflict as a way to maintain stability at home. And ignorance is strength. That is the ultimate weapon. Keep people uninformed, and they will never challenge the system that rules them. So let us return to our question. How can a society learn to love its chains? The answer lies in the power of ideas. If you can control language, you can control thought. If you can control thought, you can control behavior. And if you can control behavior, you can control reality itself. When we hear Orwell's slogans today, they still make us uneasy. They still sound insane. But that discomfort, that small shiver running down your spine, is exactly the point. Orwell wanted us to recognize how fragile our freedom is. He wanted us to see that the destruction of truth does not always happen with violence. Sometimes it happens with words. Sometimes it happens with silence. And sometimes it happens when we laugh at something we should take seriously. This is why the philosophy of 1984 is not just literature, it is a survival manual. It shows us what happens when people stop questioning, when they stop resisting, and when they allow contradictions to become common sense. So today, we are not just reading a novel. We are looking into a mirror that reflects not only Orwell's imagination, but the darkest corners of human history, and perhaps our future. When we open the pages of 1984, we are not simply reading a story. We are stepping into one of the darkest worlds ever imagined in literature. At its surface, the book tells the story of Winston Smith, a low-ranking member of the party. But to reduce 1984 to just Winston's personal struggle would be to miss the larger picture. Orwell uses Winston as a window into a system so powerful, so all-encompassing, that it reshapes reality itself. The society of 1984 is ruled by the party and its symbolic leader, Big Brother. Yet here's the catch. Big Brother may not even exist as a real person. He is less a man than an idea, a face on a poster, a pair of watchful eyes, a name whispered in fear. His true power lies not in his presence, but in his absence. By never appearing in person, Big Brother becomes an almost godlike figure. You cannot touch him, but you cannot escape him either. This is where Orwell's genius begins to shine. Unlike other dystopias, 1984 is not just about control through violence. It is about control through psychology. Citizens are not merely threatened, they are reshaped. They are trained to love Big Brother, even as he destroys them. Winston's world is one where telescreens hang in every home, watching every movement. A careless glance, a whisper, or even a flicker of doubt on your face can betray you. It is not enough to obey, you must believe. The party does not only want your body, it wants your soul. Here, thought itself becomes dangerous. In fact, Orwell gives it a name: thought crime. To think against the party is the most serious crime of all. It doesn't matter if you never speak the thought aloud. If your mind dares to wander into forbidden territory, you are already guilty. And how does the party enforce this control? By shaping language itself. In the world of 1984, the official language is Newspeak, a language designed not to expand communication, but to limit it. Words that could express rebellion or freedom are systematically removed. If a word does not exist, can the thought behind it survive? This is more than clever world building. It is philosophy in action. Orwell is telling us that language does not simply describe reality, it shapes it. If you take away the word freedom, how long before people forget the very concept? But let's not forget, Orwell was not inventing this from nothing. He was writing in a time when totalitarian regimes were already experimenting with language and truth. Propaganda was everywhere. Posters, films, newspapers, and radio broadcasts reshaped history every single day. To read 1984 in Orwell's time was to recognize echoes of Hitler's Germany and Stalin's Soviet Union. To read it today is to recognize echoes of our own world. That's why 1984 feels timeless. The book is not just a warning about politics, it is a warning about human psychology, about how easily people adapt to oppression, about how quickly lies can become truth, if repeated often enough. Winston, our guide through this nightmare, begins the story as an ordinary man. He is not a hero in the traditional sense. He is tired, disillusioned, and quietly rebellious. He writes in a secret diary, aware that even this small act could get him killed. But his weakness is what makes him powerful as a character. He is us, an ordinary person trying to preserve a fragile spark of humanity in a world built to extinguish it. So when we study 1984, we are not just studying Orwell's imagination. We are studying the human condition. We are asking, what happens when truth itself is under attack? What happens when words lose their meaning? What happens when fear is the air we breathe? This is why 1984 has remained one of the most important books of the last century. It is not only literature, it is philosophy disguised as a novel. And in the next section, we will see how the party perfects its most dangerous weapon, propaganda. If there is one thing Orwell understood better than most, it was the terrifying power of propaganda. From the very beginning of 1984, one question haunts us. Why don't people rebel? How can an entire population live under constant surveillance, endless lies, and suffocating fear, yet never rise against their oppressors? The answer lies in the party's mastery of propaganda. In Orwell's world, propaganda is not merely a tool. It is the oxygen of the regime. It flows through posters, through telescreens, through orchestrated rituals of hate. It transforms raw fear into loyalty, and despair into obedience. Take the 2 minutes hate, a daily ritual where citizens are gathered in front of telescreens to scream, shout, and curse at the party's enemies. On the surface, it looks ridiculous, an entire crowd howling at a television screen. But think deeper. This is not just about anger. It is about directing emotions. Because emotions are dangerous. If left unshaped, anger could turn against the regime itself. But if that anger is carefully redirected toward a convenient enemy, it becomes fuel for the system. This is the logic behind the Hate Week, a larger, more theatrical version of the same ritual. Banners are hung, slogans are shouted, and new enemies are revealed. Every year, the public is reminded that they are surrounded by danger. And in the presence of danger, people cling more tightly to authority. Orwell was drawing from real history. In Stalin's Soviet Union, the label of enemy of the people was enough to destroy lives. Neighbors turned against neighbors, families betrayed one another, and millions were sent to labor camps. By inventing enemies, Stalin not only eliminated dissent, but also created unity built on fear and hatred. In 1984, this same tactic is perfected. Hate is not just encouraged, it is mandatory. Even Winston, who doubts the party, finds himself swept up in the frenzy of the crowd during the 2 minutes hate. He describes the experience as electric, as if the urge to scream, to destroy, to annihilate, surges through every person in the room like a current. It is not reason that binds them together, it is pure emotion. And here we arrive at the philosophy of propaganda. Back in 1931, sociologist Serge Chakotay outlined 4 key principles of effective propaganda. 1. Appeal to emotions, not reason. 2. Frame the world in us versus them. 3. Use collective rituals, not individual persuasion. 4. Hide the propagandist's hand. Look closely at 1984. The party follows these principles flawlessly. The 2 minutes hate is not about debate. It is about unleashing emotions. The constant war against shifting enemies creates the eternal us versus them. The group rituals turn individuals into a mob, where resistance becomes impossible. And above it all, the figure of Big Brother remains hidden, never appearing in person, yet controlling everything. This is why propaganda works so well in Orwell's world. It is not about convincing people through logic. It is about bypassing logic entirely. It is about hijacking the very machinery of human emotion, fear, anger, loyalty, love, and reshaping it in the image of the party. And here's the chilling part. Propaganda does not stop once the crowd leaves the ritual. It lingers. It seeps into language, into memory, into the way people perceive reality itself. The next time they feel anger, they already know where to direct it. The next time they feel fear, they already know whom to blame. This is why Orwell's analysis feels so timeless. Look at any period of history, and you will see the same mechanism. The enemy might change, the slogans might change, but the structure, the emotional engineering of propaganda remains the same. And that is the true genius of Orwell's warning. Propaganda is not just politics, it is psychology weaponized. If propaganda is the party's weapon for controlling the crowd, then mind control is its weapon for controlling the individual. In Orwell's 1984, the most terrifying prison is not the Ministry of Love or the torture chamber of Room 101. The most terrifying prison is the human mind itself, reshaped, restricted, and rewritten by the party. Let us begin with newspeak. On the surface, it looks like just another language, but its purpose is far more sinister. Unlike natural languages, which grow and expand over time, newspeak shrinks. Every year, words are deleted, meanings are narrowed, and expressions vanish. Words like freedom, rebellion, or even justice are systematically erased, and with each missing word, a piece of thought disappears. Because here lies Orwell's philosophical insight. Our thoughts live inside language. If you cannot name a concept, can you truly think it? Imagine trying to express the idea of freedom without using the word freedom. Imagine trying to describe tyranny without the word tyranny. Without the words, the thoughts themselves wither and fade. In this way, the party doesn't just punish thought crime, it prevents thought crime from even existing. But newspeak is only the beginning. The party also attacks memory. History itself is rewritten, not once, but constantly. Newspapers are altered, photographs are destroyed, records vanish. Yesterday's enemy becomes today's ally, and yesterday's ally becomes today's enemy. And because every document is rewritten, there is no proof left behind. This creates a frightening paradox. People begin to doubt their own memory. Winston remembers a time before the party, but he cannot prove it. Documents, photos, testimonies, everything has been erased. Without evidence, memory becomes a ghost. Even your own mind cannot be trusted. And then comes the most famous symbol of Orwell's philosophy, 2 + 2, 5. On the surface, it is a mathematical absurdity. But that is precisely the point. The party does not demand obedience only in action, it demands obedience in thought. If they say that 2 + 2 = 5, and you believe it, then they have conquered not just your behavior but your reality itself. Winston resists this with all his strength, but O'Brien, his eventual torturer, forces him to confront the terrifying idea. Truth is not what you see, not what you feel, not what you know. Truth is only what the party says it is. If they say the past never happened, then it never happened. If they say 2 + 2 = 5, then it equals 5. This is not just a plot device, it is a profound warning about the fragility of truth. Orwell is showing us that truth is not indestructible. It depends on our willingness to defend it. When enough people surrender, when enough people accept the lie, the truth itself disappears. Philosophically, this echoes an old idea. Reality is not only external, it is social. It exists in agreements, in shared language, in collective memory. If you destroy those, you do not just control people, you control the very fabric of reality. And here is the most terrifying realization. This form of control is far more effective than violence. Violence can kill the body, but language, memory, and ideology can enslave the soul. That is why Winston's rebellion is so fragile. It is not just a political struggle, it is a battle for sanity itself. A battle to say, 2 + 2 = 4, even when the entire world insists it equals 5. And this is the essence of Orwell's warning. Once you allow power to dictate truth, nothing is safe. Reality itself becomes a prisoner. If propaganda manipulates emotions and newspeak reshapes thought, then surveillance is the final chain, the constant reminder that you are never truly alone. In Orwell's 1984, this surveillance takes the form of telescreens. These devices are installed in every home, every hallway, every workplace. They are more than televisions. They are two-way eyes. They broadcast propaganda, but they also watch you. Every glance, every twitch of your face, every hesitation in your voice can be recorded. The chilling slogan reads, "Big Brother is watching you." But here's the terrifying truth. Big Brother doesn't need to be watching you every second. He only needs you to believe that he might be. This idea was inspired by the philosopher Jeremy Bentham, who designed the concept of the Panopticon. It was a prison in which cells were arranged in a circle around a central watchtower. The guard in the tower could see every prisoner, but the prisoners could never know when they were being observed. The result? They behaved as if they were watched at all times. Orwell takes this logic and applies it to an entire society. In 1984, you don't need soldiers on every corner. You only need the possibility of being observed. Because when people believe they are always watched, they begin to police themselves. Fear becomes internalized. Control is no longer outside, it is inside. But Orwell goes even further. In his dystopia, surveillance is not just technological, it is social. Citizens are turned into walking telescreens. Neighbors spy on neighbors. Children denounce their parents. Even a careless word whispered in private can return to you as a death sentence. Consider the character of Parsons, Winston's neighbor. He is betrayed not by a stranger, but by his own daughter, who reports him for thought crime. What could be more devastating than realizing that even your child has been trained to see you, not as a parent, but as a potential enemy of the party? This is what makes surveillance in 1984 so terrifying. It doesn't only watch your actions, it erodes trust itself. Who can you confide in when everyone might be an informant? What does friendship mean when betrayal is encouraged? What does love mean when intimacy itself is a risk? And once again, Orwell is not inventing this from thin air. Under Stalin, the culture of denunciation became routine. Citizens were encouraged to report anyone who spoke against the regime. Families broke apart. Friends disappeared. Entire communities lived in fear of invisible eyes and hidden ears. Philosophically, this form of surveillance creates a unique kind of prison, one without bars, one without guards. The bars are in your mind. You censor yourself. You silence your own doubts. You even betray your own memories, because if you think something forbidden, you are already guilty. This is why Winston's rebellion feels so fragile. It is not just about resisting propaganda or rejecting newspeak. It is about resisting the suffocating presence of an invisible gaze. A gaze that makes privacy impossible, that makes intimacy dangerous, that makes truth itself a crime. And here lies Orwell's final warning about surveillance. When people believe they are always being watched, they stop needing a dictator to control them. They become their own jailers. For much of 1984, Winston Smith represents the fragile spark of human resistance. He is not a hero in the traditional sense. He is weak, flawed, and constantly afraid. But precisely because he is ordinary, his rebellion matters. He stands for the possibility that even in the darkest systems, the human spirit might still whisper, "No." Winston's rebellion begins in the smallest of acts, writing in a secret diary. On the surface, it seems trivial, but in a world where even thoughts are policed, writing down with Big Brother is an act of revolution. It is a declaration that truth still exists. And then there is Julia. She too rebels, but in a different way. Where Winston resists with thought, Julia resists with desire. Their secret love affair becomes a form of protest. To hold each other in a world that denies intimacy is to declare that humanity still lives. For a brief moment, Winston believes this love might save him. He dreams of freedom, not as a grand political change, but as the simple ability to feel, to love, to think without chains. Yet Orwell makes sure we know, in this world, nothing escapes the party. Enter O'Brien. At first, he appears as an ally, a higher-ranking party member who secretly opposes the regime. Winston and Julia trust him, believing he is part of a resistance movement. But O'Brien is no savior. He is the party's most cunning weapon. His role is not to help Winston, but to break him. And so begins Winston's descent into betrayal and despair. He is arrested, tortured, and systematically dismantled, not just physically, but mentally. O'Brien does not only demand obedience, he demands belief. He tells Winston, "It is not enough to obey Big Brother. You must love him." The torture escalates until Winston faces the infamous Room 101. For every prisoner, Room 101 contains their deepest fear. For Winston, it is rats. And in this final, horrific moment, Winston breaks. He cries out for Julia, begging that the torture be done to her instead of him. And in that moment, the last piece of his resistance collapses. The man who once dreamed of freedom now betrays the person he loved most. Orwell shows us a brutal truth. Under enough pressure, anyone can be broken. But here lies the philosophical weight of Winston's collapse. Orwell is not simply telling us that Winston fails. He is telling us that there is no such thing as unbreakable human will, not in the face of absolute power. The party's control is not complete until they rewrite even love, even loyalty, even memory. By the end of the novel, Winston is no longer a rebel. He is a shell. He sits in a cafe, drinking gin, no longer capable of resistance. And when the telescreen announces a great military victory, Winston's heart swells with joy. The final line is devastating. He loved Big Brother. Why does Orwell end here? because he wants us to see what totalitarianism truly means. It is not just control of actions, or even of speech. It is the annihilation of the self. Winston does not simply lose his life, he loses his soul, and that is the ultimate warning. A system that can force you to love your oppressor has achieved the most terrifying victory of all. Welcome to Lumora Mind, a channel where we explore the hidden depths of philosophy, literature, and the human condition. If you've made it this far, don't forget to subscribe and join our journey into the world of ideas. Together, we uncover the wisdom that lies in stories, the warnings hidden in history, and the questions that still haunt us today. Now let us return to Orwell's 1984, and the final lesson it leaves behind. What does Orwell want us to take from Winston's defeat? At first glance, it feels hopeless. The party wins. Big Brother wins. Humanity loses. But Orwell was not simply writing to depress us. He was writing to awaken us. The destruction of Winston is meant to shock us into awareness, to remind us that freedom, truth, and love are not guaranteed. They survive only if we fight for them. Throughout the novel, Orwell shows us that totalitarianism does not begin with soldiers or prisons. It begins with words. It begins with the manipulation of language, the rewriting of history, the normalization of lies. Once those are accepted, the rest follows naturally. And here lies the danger. 1984 is not about some distant future. It is about every moment when truth is bent for power. It is about every society where people accept contradictions because it feels safer than questioning. It is about every silence that allows injustice to grow. Orwell leaves us with a haunting challenge. Will we recognize the warning in time? Because the slogans of 1984 are not locked inside a book. They are patterns of thought, ready to appear whenever freedom weakens. Freedom is slavery. War is peace. Ignorance is strength. Each is a reminder of how fragile truth really is. So the question becomes, what do we do with this knowledge? We resist not only with protest, but with thought, with questioning, with refusing to let words lose their meaning, with refusing to let silence bury the truth. That is why 1984 remains one of the most important works of philosophy disguised as fiction. It does not simply tell a story, it hands us a mirror. And in that mirror we see not only Winston, not only Orwell, but ourselves. And perhaps that is the real message. If we do not defend truth, no one else will. So as we close this exploration of Orwell's masterpiece, let us remember, freedom is fragile, truth is fragile, humanity is fragile. But awareness, the willingness to see, to think, to resist, may yet keep the spark alive. Thank you for watching Lumora Mind. Stay curious, stay questioning, and most of all, stay free.